Shalom Aleichem, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Shmoozing with Avi. I'm very excited. We have a very important guest today who has written a very important book because every one of these stories is so important, and she has quite the background. Her name is Roni Robbins, and she has had articles in the Huffington Post, Forbes, New York Daily News, Adweek, Healthline, MD, Mother Nature Network, and The Forward, and so many, Hadassah Magazine. She was a staff writer at the Florida Today, USA Today, the Birmingham News, and the Atlanta Business Chronicle. And so she's also interviewed a lot of celebrities, including Wolf Blitzer and Andy Gibb, Hank Aaron, and even Usher, who was just at the wonderful Super Bowl, for those of you who love the Super Bowl. In any event, she has written a book called Hands of Gold, One Man's Quest to Find the Silver Lining in Misfortune. And this book has won awards. It won the 2023 International Book Award, the 2023 Global Book Awards. It's based on a true story, and it relates to the Holocaust. And so I'm very excited to welcome Roni Robbins. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I look forward to sharing with my audiences your wonderful book. For those of the people in my audience who know my style, I always like to find out a little bit about your background. You know, where was your family from in the old country? When did they come to America? Where did you grow up? And what kind of Jewish background what would you say was the Jewish influence on your life when you were growing up?
Thank you so much for this opportunity, Avi. I'm in awe of you and all you do. And so I appreciate this opportunity. My grandparents were from the old country. My grandfather, who this book is based on mostly, was from Hungary. He was from a place called Schnatzua. And it was in an area that was in transition from, it was Czechoslovakia, it was Hungary, it was then Ukraine, and my grandmother was from Romania. She and this story is their story. It's their love story. It's my grandfather left cassette tapes of his life. I grew up in New York, on Long Island. My grandparents at that point lived in Rego Park, New York, and my mom, I skipped a generation. My mom, it went my grandparents to my mom and her siblings. They were in the Bronx, where I believe you are also from. Yes,
Landslide.
yes,
Also,
yes.
my father came probably very close to where your grandfather was, in those mountain areas that one day they were Hungary, one day they were Czechoslovakia, and today they're Ukraine. So I'd like to hear
Right,
more about that too. But keep
right.
going. When did they come?
So they came in the early 1900s. So my grandfather, he was born in 1905, and then so he was born. There was already war that he was experiencing, as a young child, and he came in 1925. So he was 20 years old. My grandmother also came around that time. They both came through Canada to New York. And my grandmother was a seamstress in the Manhattan Garment District.
Yes.
And my grandfather, he did a bunch of different trades. He was a farmer, of course, in the old country. I should say that Schnatzua was near Munkash. So yeah, Carpathian
That's
Mountains.
where my
So,
father was from.
oh,
A little
see?
village called Apschitze, which was right around the corner from where they were from. Yeah.
So I take us to my novel starts, it really traces my grandfather's path and what was going on at the time, of course, war, and then all these changing of borders, and the Russians were fighting. And it relates to today, the book, because the Russians are still fighting. And so history definitely repeats itself. Of course, much of their family died in the Holocaust in Auschwitz. They would have been taken to Auschwitz. Excuse me, my grandfather left before that. He had a goal to get to the Golden Medina,
Right.
the land of gold, the land of opportunity, and he did eventually. Other siblings were there, so they paved the path, and also they were dangling that gold Medina over his head that he wanted to be able to join them. He, of course, didn't know that all his family would perish in the Holocaust, and there, but for the grace of God, did he go? Um, so they were, when I was growing up, they were in um, they had settled in the Bronx, but my mom was born there. And but then she met my dad. He was from Brooklyn. He was from Hewlett, actually, and then Brooklyn. And then when I knew them, my grandparents, they were in Rego Park, in Queens. And I spent a lot of time with them, the holidays. The Jewish culture that I was brought up with was from them. Um, there was some Yiddish, but they hid it from us, just like they hid. Every once in a while, you'd hear them say Kinderlach, and you'd know something was going on. But and
That's
they
funny.
had their own. They would talk, and then you'd be like, they're talking again and keeping stuff from us.
Right.
But we didn't know that much. They tried, they were Yinglish, they were trying they 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 were trying to speak without the accent. My grandfather did it much better than my grandmother did, I think, because he was out, he went out of the house and interacted with people more. But it was their secret language. And there was a lot of mystery to them that I always knew. They didn't talk about the Holocaust. You could talk to them and ask them for school projects about their life, and they tell you little bits and pieces, but they would never tell you about what happened, what they heard, what they learned about. So my novel, my grandfather left cassette tapes of his life, cassette tapes. Oh, I should have brought the cassette tape so I could show
That's
you.
okay. You'll send me the pictures of them and I'll put them up. I'm sure you have
Yes.
photographs. But before we actually get into
Go
the
ahead.
novel, I'm still
Sorry.
curious. No, no, please.
Yes.
I'm interested to know, number one, where did your father's family come from and when did they come to America? And when you were so from the Bronx, somehow you ended up on Long Island, which was pretty normal. Many of those immigrant families eventually, left the Bronx and went to Long Island. But I'm curious to know, before we get to the novel, what did you feel or know about being Jewish when you were growing up on Long Island, other than, yeah, there were a lot of Jewish kids, Jewish, and how did that trigger your desire to become a writer, to become a journalist, to become who you are? And then we can get into why and how, because the story of this novel sounds amazing. So tell me a little bit more about your background.
So my grandparents, yes, I sort of glossed over that. They were very Jewish. My grandfather was involved in the synagogue, and he brought us with him to synagogue. We had Jewish holidays at their home and long tables for Passover, and he would lead. And both my grandparents had my I think my grandfather always wanted to be a chazan. They were very into Jewish music. My mom, of course, passed all of this to us. This love of Judaism, this love of the arts. And that my grandmother once was a singer, and she actually sang with Moishe Oisher, which they were very into Hazanim and cantorial music, and I grew up uh, around with music. I grew up with Jewish music. We went to the Hasidic festival at Westbury Music Festival. Fair Festival,
There.
fair, okay. We were exposed to a lot of Jewish and cultural Jewish theater, and my mom exposed us to that. I played the violin. My grandfather taught my mom how to play the violin. My
Wow.
mom taught me how to play the violin. This is what I cherish about my family. That side of the family brought us enlightenment, in cultural, Jewish culture, from the holidays to everything that went with it. And obviously, I was drawn to the arts in this own way of mine. My father is actually a blacksmith. We have a creativity in our background. My brother is also a blacksmith. My grandfather was they were tailors, and they were they worked with my grandfather was a cobbler. These were creative
Hmm.
people that worked with their hands,
Wow.
hands of gold.
Right.
Hands are very important. I used to admire my grandfather's hands for some reason. Who knew years later I would use that as the topic for my book, but I digress. I was very involved in in my Judaism. I went to synagogue every Shabbat. I still go to synagogue every Shabbat. I'm the usher in my synagogue. I've been on the board twice. Um, I was USY president. I was involved in USY, United Synagogue Youth and Conservative Movement. So I went to conventions. I became Hillel president of my college,
Hmm.
as I was also developing my journalism skills along the way. There was this parallel universe of my Jewish identity. And I eventually became a Jewish journalist as it's all about shared, right? There's some way this is all supposed to be part of the divine plan for me and for us in our lives. And that starts out with maybe where you come from and how you develop. And yeah, so I was
Well,
very involved in Jewish life.
it's very interesting to me that you and I seem to share a lot of these traits. Not only does our family come from the same area, but one of my great uncles, Jacob Hoffman, I have a picture of him in the shtetl in 1923
Wow.
with a sign that's a big boot. It's like a hand-drawn boot. He was a cobbler. And it says Jacob Hoffman Dubrovnik. And so, it's interesting that we share so much. So when did you begin to write? Like, when did you realize that your calling was to express yourself in writing?
Oddly enough, I thought I'd be a musician. Doesn't everyone want to be a musician? A musician, an actor, or a journalist? Those are all very exciting fields, right? And you and I share some of that. I also did a little bit of theater, and I raised a theater kid. But I thought I was going to be a musician. Like I said, I started out as a violinist. That wasn't going to be it. I learned how to play guitar that wasn't going to be it either. But I realized that I liked writing the lyrics. That's where it started. That's how it, that's where the seed started to grow. I liked writing poetry. So obviously poetry, lyrics, they were very similar. And then from there, I realized I just liked writing. I should go back and tell you that I had this thing about my penmanship, and probably lots of other kids had this. You would start out with a clean notebook and your writing would be so beautiful and everything would be fresh. And then by the end, you're like, I've just made a mess of the whole entire thing. So, but you start out so fresh, with each new page at the beginning. So, like an open book. But I did have a fascination with penmanship. And then I got into calligraphy. So writing is just a different art form for me. And I think because my background, my family is very artsy, they're all left-handed, except for me and my sister. My mom was a silversmith. There's a lot of artistry in my family. And for some reason, I liked words. I did well in school completely, overall. I was smart, or maybe everyone else was dumb. I have no idea. But, I like to think that I did very well in school. And one of the areas that I did well in was English. And when I got to college, I was writing people's, I was helping type on a typewriter, I'll show my age, papers. And as I was typing them, I was editing them and I was rewriting them and I gave them back something. They're like, well, wow, that like, yeah, if I'm going to type it, you're going to get an A. So, or tell me how I do, maybe a B, but I'm hoping for an A for you. But I love words and I always liked reading and I found that I could be creative in this way and that people would pay me for it. And, and I could, in high school, there was a popular, that was a big thing to be popular. And I had a popular friend, and she was going into journalism. I'm like, that sounds like a good avenue for me. I mean, I like writing and English, and maybe that's something that I should do. So, so I went into it and I wrote the opening copy to the school. Well, I should tell you, everyone's assignment, I took journalism, figured that was the way to start to be a journalist, was to, if I'm going to have a career, got to start with the journalism class in high school. And I wrote, everyone was assigned to write the opening copy to the yearbook. And I wrote something, and somebody looked over at my page and said, have her read hers. And I was like, okay. And I was reading and everyone was quiet and I stopped and the teacher goes, keep going. And I read more. And what all you need in life is some teacher to show to be, and after I read that, the teacher goes, that is our opening copy of our yearbook. And then I wrote all the copy for the yearbook. I'll take a step back now. Sorry. See, edit. This is why I write instead of talking.
Right.
To edit myself, to go back a step. I won some contests you always hear about this. That's how writers start, right? You submit something. I wrote a poetry contest for my mom for Mother's Day in Newsday, I believe. Well, it might have been the Penny Saver. And there was a Mother's Day contest. And I entered a poem and I won. And the good thing about this was I won all kinds of gifts for my mom. So for that 1 year, I was her favorite child, right? But just for that one little time, I was her favorite child. But I, it was something really beautiful that I could do with my writing. And it also said, I guess I'm good at this. There was that too. I was good at this. The high school also used my copy. I wrote something for the program for the high school graduation, for my high school graduation, and they used that on the cover. And I got a journalism scholarship. As a New Yorker, I got a journalism scholarship to a Southern school because I probably checked all the box. They were like, we got a New Yorker, yay, in a
Right.
Southern school. So that was probably a coup for them. So they gave me a journalism scholarship to the University of South Carolina. Can you imagine the culture shock there, right?
Oh,
And
wow.
then I lost my, my real rough, New York accent, which was actually probably a good thing for
Right.
me. But
Did you encounter any anti-Semitism?
I did not, even though, and I should tell you, which is odd. Wait, where you want to know in high school, in growing up on Long Island,
Well,
or
growing up on Long Island, I'm going to assume that there probably wasn't a lot of anti-Semitism, but I'd like to know whether you encountered anti-Semitism at any of those points, especially in South Carolina. I
right?
had my first roommate in college was from Tennessee. He had never
Mm,
seen a Jew, and he thought I had horns.
right.
Like for real. I'm not even being
Yeah. No,
facetious.
I've heard your act. You use that, I think.
So it's fascinating to me that there are people, even to this day, who may have never met a Jew. So being a Jew at the University of South Carolina, I'm curious to hear how, what was that like? And did it not matter?
So I will go back and tell you before I answer that part. I have never had anti-Semitism. But so I'll start with that, which I just gave it all away. But I grew up in an area of Long Island where there weren't a lot of Jews. So in that there was some, our house got, toilet papered,
Vandalized.
vandalized.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
And eggs thrown at, but I do not know if that was, I did not see that as anti-Semitism. It was not an act of anti-Semitism, and maybe I was just naive. There was no swastikas. It was maybe they didn't like us, but we either my parents kept it from us, or we didn't see it as because we were Jewish.
Hmm.
Um, so I won't go more into that, but I did not see it as anti-Semitism. I always felt at my high school graduation at a reunion, I realized there were a lot more Jews at my high school than I knew about. I didn't come out and say I was Jewish. Most of my friends were not Jewish. Of course, we went to Hebrew school, and I was part of the youth group, and I was a leader in the youth group. And but that wasn't I wasn't in the most Jewish area of
Of Long Island.
Long Island.
Right.
I was Smithtown, Hauppauge. There weren't a whole lot of Jews there. It was further out, Suffolk County.
Hmm.
And I didn't feel anti-Semitism. As far as I know, my husband, who's from Ian Robbins, who's from Atlantic Beach, also didn't have anti-Semitism, but that's Nassau County, and maybe closer to the city. So I did not know about anti-Semitism. I knew about the Holocaust. I read lots of Holocaust books. I
Hmm.
knew it was there. I read Anne Frank, of course,
Right.
but I didn't, it wasn't something that
So going to South
South
Carolina.
Carolina, I did not have that either. I did
Right.
not. Um, I think there was curiosity. It was not something that I wore, on my sleeve either. I had non-Jewish roommates. Most of the people I was around were not Jewish. They were very Southern. I think they were more taken by the fact that I had a really rough New York accent, and were really
Right.
tried hard to get me to say y'all like y'all. But because it was rough, and they had a hard time, and they used me as like, this is our Northern friend. I was a Yankee. I was they could care less about what my religion, I mean, they knew I was different already. And that actually helped me, maybe propelled me a little bit, because like I said, by my senior year, I was Hillel president, and I was editor of this school newspaper. And I
Hmm.
think that I set myself apart from the others by my accent. Maybe that gave me an edge, but anti-Semitism was not. I was
I,
lucky.
That makes me very happy because
Okay.
very often I hear stories of people who have encountered maybe not necessarily serious anti-Semitism, but certainly feelings of otherism. And certainly today, once again, we're seeing a rise in those kinds of things. So let's now tell me how you made the transition, because this is your debut novel, yes?
Yes. Yes.
So, what was that transition to go from I'm a journalist, I'm writing for papers, and then why did you suddenly decide, and what inspired you to suddenly decide to go into writing a novel, which is a huge undertaking?
I just want to, Avi, I'm sorry. I'm going to backtrack just a second because I
Sure.
realized that I encountered ignorance, not anti-Semitism, but ignorance and a little bit of why don't you go to church? Like you must be a heathen because you don't go to church. Because I worked as a journalist in small towns like Abbeville, South Carolina. These were very well, that was probably it. And Asheville, my family lives in Asheville, North Carolina. That's a little bit bigger. But in Abbeville, South Carolina, somebody asked me while I was interviewing them, do you go to church? And I said, no, I don't. And they said, well, God will forgive you for that. And I mumbled, well, there's nothing to be forgiven, but she, that was not sitting right. What do you mean you don't go to church? So that was not anti-Semitism. That was just ignorance. I wasn't going to push the envelope there to tell her why I don't go to church.
Right.
But there was some of that in the rural areas of that.
Listen,
Okay.
I,
So
I'm a firm believer that you're absolutely right. All hatred, all racism, all anti-Semitism is really a product of ignorance. And so the only way ultimately to solve the ignorance is through education. We must educate those who are not knowledgeable enough. And it doesn't matter whether it's about Islam or Judaism or Zen Buddhism or black or white or yellow or green.
mhm.
The bottom line is until we start to accept each other, no matter what, there's always going to be that kind of ignorance, which then leads to things like anti-Semitism and racism and everything else. So back to this transition. I'm fascinated about the story behind this book. So tell me a little bit about that transition from I'm a journalist, I'm a novelist, and what the inspiration for the book was.
So my grandfather left cassette tapes
Right.
of his life to the family. My mother passed them to me, and I was a reporter for the Atlanta Jewish Times. I came here after daily newspaper reporting for my earlier journalism career. I moved. I met my husband, and I had to move to Atlanta, or else we were going to continue to be a long distance relationship. And I took a job at the Atlanta Jewish Times and freelanced while I was there, also for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. So I was doing two things at once because I like to wear several hats. You like to wear hats too, I see.
Many.
Um, Many hats. um, so I initially wrote a column about driving around and listening to my grandfather's voice, but I wasn't a crazy person. I actually was listening to the cassette tapes. And I wrote about him leaving his legacy behind him leaving his story behind as a legacy to his family, to his progeny, and how other people can do that too. Giving memories a voice was my headline,
Hmm.
and just that other people can do the same thing. I guess. So that was early. That was in 1990s, in the early 1990s, and they had passed away. I should say my grandparents passed away a year to the date of each other. So on the yurt site, the other one passed away, January 31st, which just passed. So that was a significant day. And my grandfather left, I guess my mother passed me the tapes a few years after they passed away. I listened to the tapes, I wrote this column, and then
How
I walked.
many tapes? How many tapes were there?
There were
Approximately.
nine 45 minutes on each side tapes
Wow.
on a
Wow.
Panasonic tape
Wow.
recorder, and of his life, from start to finish, basically. And like after I wrote the column, I put it away. I was journalism. I was gonna continue to be a journalist. And I went on from there to the Business Chronicle, and then I went back to the Jewish Times. I raised my kids, wrote the book. The book was I decided when I was raising my kids that I wanted that there was something more than just a column. That's basically the story. It took a number of years, maybe 6 years or so, 6 or 8 years before I decided that maybe I might want to do something else with these tapes. I had started to transcribe the tapes, of course, after I had listened to it and wrote the column. I decided to transcribe the tapes, and because there was something still there that wasn't enough, that the column didn't quite do it. It was talking about how you can leave your legacy behind, but it wasn't telling their story. And their story I found compelling. There were a few little tidbits that I decided would make for a dramatic, presentation of some sort, and that I was going to try my hand at this. Just at first it was an interview, basically. It was transcribing the tapes. That's an interview. That's something that I was used to. And besides them having this love story of dying on the same, I thought that was just touching, that that on the yurt site, the anniversary of one's death, the other one would pass away. And some other details, of course, the Holocaust episodes, but this perspective of learning about your family having died and not being able to do anything about it, and it already being too late. I mean, I think that my grandfather tried to get, and you hear this story, it's everyone's story.
Right.
They try to get them to come here, but they don't listen. It's not bad over here. It'll be fine. This crazy guy will go away. Nobody's listening to him, really. This Nazi thing, bunch of,
Listen,
baloney.
in the shtetl where my father lived in the Carpathian Mountains, not far from where your grandfather came from, one of my great uncles, Max Moishe, came home one day, and he told everybody in the shtetl, he said, there are camps, concentration camps, where they're bringing the Jews and they're taking off all their clothes and taking everything and sending all the women and children and old people into the crematoriums, and they're gassing them and burning them. You have to run away. And all the people in the shtetl said, "Oi, poor Moshe. He lost his mind. He's insane. He doesn't know what he's saying anymore." And he said, "If you don't run away, you're all going to be dead." And they said, "I'm sorry, Moshe, but you're not with it. You obviously are a problem." And he ran away, and needless to say, a week later or whatever it was, they came and took everybody away, including my father and my entire family. So luckily my father survived Auschwitz. But yes, they all were taken to Auschwitz, so I understand. Tell me, so I'm very curious, because once again, one of the things that I'm finding nowadays is that, like you, so many of us who have a shared heritage are discovering these artifacts My family has a whole collection of things. Several friends of mine have written books and done shows or musicals or written plays about these discoveries. The grandfather left a diary. The father left a package of letters, your
Mhm.
cassette tapes. My family has books and all these albums and journals and all these things. What was it about these particular recordings that you, I guess, approached first as a journalist? And then where was the trigger? What was in that story that suddenly made you want to write a novel?
So there were, you're a performer, you deal in drama. There was a bit of drama going on. It was not an easy life that people were leading. You know, we think that the pandemic was so hard. My grandfather was told he was terminal at 26 and he lived till 86. My grandmother had to be the breadwinner to take care of the family when he was ill. TB is very similar to COVID and RSV. You know, these illnesses, respiratory illnesses that we deal with today. TB is still around. My grandfather was a test case for streptomycin, which is still around. He was a clinical trial patient, basically, a guinea pig of sorts. He was involved in a workplace shooting spree. It was written about in the New York Daily News, which I years later ended up freelancing for. You know, I have these materials that there was just one thing after another that made it a dramatic story, a near-death experience, an edge of your seats. You know, what's going to happen to these people? Are they going to make it? Is my grandfather going to make it to New York? You know, there were so many things working against him. And yet he persevered. And you know, and he got to New York, he got to raise his family, but he had tragedy, and he had so there's the making of a great novel to me is something that keeps you guessing. You know, certainly I've read enough other writers to realize what makes anyone want to turn a page is, you know, is adventure and near death and love and conquering the odds, you know, beating the odds that are against us in life. And I both saw your story, my story, and everyone else's story is there was so much that my family must be like every other family. And I've learned that since publishing this book, that everyone's like, oh, I know somebody who, oh, that reminds me of my Uncle Joe. So, you know,
Mm.
this is everyone's story, every Jewish person's story. And for those who read it that are not Jewish, it's enlightenment. It's this lack of knowledge they can learn about this time period. And also, you know, despite all the obstacles that my grandfather had, he triumphed. And that is, you know, something that, you know, even in today's world, you know, we see what's going on in Israel, and it's disheartening, and you feel like you there's no future, and there's no, and are we going to be victorious, you know, and we want to be victorious, but you know, we're going to have to make it through some steps to get there. And So I saw that as the human struggle, against whatever it is in our way that we need to get through to get to the finish line, and to have a nice life, you know. And it's hard to see past that sometimes for anyone who has a health challenge, or you know what's going on in the world, and if you know if you're dealing with death, certainly. So Well, I want it to be an uplifting story that other people can relate to, and if they find their family in the novel, then wonderful. Then I feel like that I've accomplished something.
So tell
And
us, so tell us now the
yes.
plot of this novel, because it's not exactly your grandfather's story. It's, as you say, loosely based on this inspiring true story. Give us the plot. Tell us why we should go out and buy this book right away. You've won awards. Obviously, you
Yes.
recognized for this amazing story.
Well, it is a journey through many obstacles. It is romance and adventure and near-death experiences. It's a hero emerging from within these pages. It's a secret that readers will have to discover what that is. It's metaphor. So even from the title of the book, Hands of Gold, it's misleading and that was the intention. It is everybody's family immigrant journey. And if you read this book, you are going to want to know about your own family. You're going to want to delve into your own family. And I'm not going to say that I'm the only one that can write this kind of story. Everyone has a story. If they want to dig it up, if they want to just even to be able to understand themselves, you need to know where you came from, to know who you are as a person and what makes you who you are and what really it takes to have a life, to have a successful, to have a long life, to do what you intend to do, to have a dream, to hold on to that dream and make it happen for yourself. What are the ingredients? And I would imagine that it's the persistence and it's the drama that we all have to go through in our lives to end up as a rounded, fulfilling person for a life of a full life and a fulfilling life means you have to struggle. So that's this story.
So the protagonist is Sam Fox, who I guess
Yes,
is based on your grandfather.
it is.
So one of the episodes that I read about in your materials is that he walked all across Europe, across countries to escape the anti-Semitism of pre-Nazi Europe. Number one, I'd like to hear a little bit about what that march was all about, because to me it sounds so similar to what we are dealing with today with caravans. My mother, after the war, she also survived World War II and walked halfway across Europe to get to the refugee camps in Germany after the war. Nowadays, we see caravans of humans trying to escape persecution, trying to escape violence, and walking across countries to get to America or to get to the new world, so to speak. Tell me a little bit about Sam's journey across the continents.
So he was determined to get to America. And so he took baby steps along the way. He went to Prague and then he ran out of money. So he had to get turned back around. And then he try again. If first you don't succeed, he was able to work something out and they sold potatoes and he was able to and they sold milk and like I said, he was a farmer, so he managed to try again and then he walked and he rested at night and he there he might have wanted to catch a ride with somebody, but he didn't want to bring attention to himself because he was running from being drafted into the Czechoslovakian army, being conscripted. So he kept his head low, but he did what I think we should all try to do, and I feel like that we can depend on our own. And so he found the Jews, and the Jews helped him along as he went along. And of course, there's a segment of the book that talks about him working on he was on a work ship, and he was very creative about how he was going to get off that work ship to get to America. He signed up to work on as the crew for a ship that was going to go from Europe to Boston, and then he jumped off and was able to get to America through Canada. He knew what his goal was, and he was by himself. He didn't have a family to support. He left his family behind, and they walked. So if it's your story, Avi, then the same, then I didn't make this stuff up completely.
No, but I love the fact that every story is different, first of all. My story is different than your story. And every one of these people that I know personally, many of whom I've interviewed, each story is so unique and so different and so exciting in some ways because it's different. Again, I am fascinated by the incredible epic bravery of all of these people. Because, like you said, we thought COVID was bad. When they're taking people away and putting them in cattle cars, that's bad. COVID was terrible. It was a horrible thing for all of us around the world to deal with. But it's very different than when there are bombs going off over your head or rockets coming in, to your town. And so I applaud you for making the story so easy for people to digest. And again, to me, these are epic stories of bravery, epic stories of love, epic stories of heartbreak. And, all of these stories, especially the ones well written like yours, need to be read. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you ended up getting it published, who the publishers are, and how is the best, what is the best way for people to actually buy your book?
So it was published by Amsterdam Publishers, but I will tell you, my own story mirrors the main character's story, in that I started writing this when I was raising my children. I will tell you, 20 years ago, some 20 years ago, I started this. I was freelancing for some of the publications that you mentioned, and I was writing this book. And it took me a while, and I won an award. And like I said, when you win an award, you know that you're onto something, right? So I won an award. I won the Amazon Breakthrough Novel Award contest in 2009. But I did not want it to be self-published. I felt like as a journalist, as a writer for my profession, I needed to go the route and stick with it to get a traditional publisher. So I thought I had like 200 rejections, but it was like, I counted them, there were like 50. And then 6 months later, I got my publisher, who's Amsterdam Publishers, is known as the largest publisher of Holocaust memoirs. And mine is a new area of Holocaust fiction. And Amsterdam Publishers took me on, and thought my story compelling. Well, like I said, I'm lucky that I can claim that I had two publishers. I had one that was interested but didn't follow through, but took me almost to the finish line, and then the second publisher who took it full on through to publishing. But I definitely took a long time. and had many rejections, and just got lucky, and finally, got lucky, but also put in my time, and had some contacts that came through for me, and I was able to get published. So that was 2022 it was published.
Wow.
And then since then I've won 4 more awards. 2 were finalist awards, and the 2 International Book Award and Global Book Awards were me winning in my category. So it has, in that it's won in all of these areas, which I will list: family saga, multicultural fiction, best book, historical fiction. So it has been in a number of, and biographical survival. So the story is very it touches in a lot of categories, as you see from the awards are in all different categories. So there's something for everyone. It is available online on my website or through Amazon. My website is ronirobbins.com. The book again is Hands of Gold: One Man's Quest to Find the Silver Lining in Misfortune. And it's also available through my publisher, Amsterdam Publishers, and in any retail book establishment. So that's Amazon, Goodreads, Barnes and Noble, Target, Walmart,
Ah.
Books A Million. It's on all
Anywhere
of those.
that books are sold,
Anywhere
you
that
can
books are
pick up
sold.
this book. Hands
Correct.
of Gold: One Man's Quest to Find the Silver Lining in Misfortune, which to me is such a Jewish trait. We always have this need to find the positive in all the horrible negativity that very often surrounds our people. So, is there anything else you'd like to share with us before we bid adieu to this wonderful project? It sounds so inspiring. And I guess my last question is, are the movie rights still available? Are people lining up to make the movie yet?
Avi, are you going to play my main character? You'd be perfect for it. You already know the Yiddish,
Well,
which I
thank
should
you.
mention. The book has a lot of Yiddish thrown in, dispersed throughout, and there's a glossary at the back, but most people read the book and then they figure out that there's a glossary in the back, but they've already tested themselves and know most of the words. So I'm not going to use you're skilled at this, but I'm not fluent. So I just threw in a bunch of Yiddish, and just to make it authentic, and because my grandparents would have used Yiddish words. But I believe my son is an actor. Between you and him, you would be the better
There you
main
go.
character. You can
He'll,
figure
he'll
out if
play
you've
the
got.
young, he'll play the
You'll
young
play the young
Sam,
Sam,
and I'll play
right?
the old Sam.
You
There you
will,
go. I
right.
can't
He won't
wait.
know as much Yiddish, but
I'll coach him.
every
I'll,
author's dream is to have a movie about their book. So, I can remain hopeful.
Great. Well, ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you so much for joining us for this
Thank
wonderful
you.
interview, Schmoozing with Avi. And today's guest was the wonderful Roni Robbins, whose book, Hands of Gold: One Man's Quest to Find the Silver Lining in Misfortune, is available anywhere that you can find books. And I hope you'll go out and buy it. This is an important book, and I think it's very inspiring. So thank you,
Thank
Ronnie,
you. Thank
and
you.
we'll talk soon enough. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.